Welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mideles, and I'm your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. Got a great program lined up for you today. A guest we've had on the program a couple times before, and we always enjoy the conversation and the new insights that he provides for us today. Joining us once again, Kocher. Sandra Sanchez, our South Texas correspondent, is going to be leading that conversation. We're going to talk about a couple different things, including some new data on mixed status families. That's where one of the individuals is a U.S. citizen and the other is an immigrant facing deportation. So we're looking forward to that conversation coming up in just a few moments. But as always, let's go ahead and start today's program by taking a look at what's trending across the border. Starting with the Trump administration is adding another militarized zone to the southern U.S. border to support border security operations. This time, it's in California. Now, the Department of Interior said it would transfer jurisdiction along most of California's international border with Mexico to the Navy to reinforce the, quote, historic role public lands have played in safeguarding national sovereignty. Now, this newly designated militarized zone extends nearly from the Arizona state line to the Otay Mountain Wilderness, traversing the Imperial Valley and border communities, including Tecate. Now, since April, large swaths of border have been designated as military zones, including right here in the Rio Grande Valley, which empowers U.S. troops to apprehend migrants and others accused of trespassing on Department of Defense installations. Staying out in California, White House Border Czar Tom Homan visited San Diego County on Saturday to provide a year-end update on the federal government's immigration enforcement efforts. He touted what he described as major gains in border security and deportations while drawing criticism from immigrant rights advocates. Homan was joined at the U.S.-Mexico border by U.S. Customs and Border Protection Commissioner and local Border Patrol officials. The visit included a heavily secured appearance near the border wall.
Secure border is saving thousands of lives every year. Under the last administration, over 4,000 aliens died making that journey. With a secure border, lives are being saved every day. Sex trafficking has plummeted. Fentanyl has plummeted. Known suspected terrorists coming across borders plummeted. A secure border means stronger national security. But most importantly, it means saving lives, saving aliens' lives, and saving Americans' lives.
Homan also said Homeland Security has recovered about 62,000 children who were smuggled into the United States, many during recent immigration and customs enforcement raids. While some eventually were found with family members, he said others were victims of sex trafficking or forced labor. And moving over to the other side of the southern border in New Orleans, residents and activists opposed to the immigration crackdown taking place in Louisiana held a vigil at the Monument to the Immigrant. They say New Orleans is a melting pot of backgrounds, and Operation Catahoula Crunch is an invasion of that culture. Now, 2 weeks ago, we're now 2 weeks into the operation, the feds say 250 people have been arrested because of their criminal backgrounds. They are hoping to arrest 5,000 people locally, but those at the vigil say the statistics show that that is not the case.
Only 20% of all of these arrests throughout the country so far have been people with any kind of criminal charges or convictions.
Now, they argue those that have been affected are instead mostly family-oriented folks who have helped rebuild the city since Hurricane Katrina. And one last headline to tell you about. Despite the cold, protesters continue taking on ICE in Minnesota. Some postal workers say immigration teams have been using area post offices to stage their operations in South Minneapolis. Organizers want the public to know that they are not collaborating with ICE. Protesters say they want their unions and management to not allow ICE to use postal property to set up for their raids. And that is a look at what is trending across the border. Time now to bring in our South Texas correspondent, Sandra Sanchez, and our guest for today's program, Kocher.
Thanks, Rudy. Welcome, Austin. Kocher is a political and legal geographer and assistant research professor at Syracuse University. We've had you on numerous times just to update people. You used to work with Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse. You write for Substack on various immigration and data issues and blog regularly. And you also are a research fellow at the American University Center for Latin American and Latino Studies, my alma mater, and the Immigration Lab. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
I wanted to start with something you recently wrote about mixed status families, where one is a U.S. citizen and another is potentially could face deportation. There's little data on it. So apparently you took part in a survey with American Families United to kind of break down some of these numbers. Tell us what you recently discovered.
Yeah, thank you. There's so many subgroups that are affected by the current immigration enforcement agenda from this current administration. And one of the things I try to do with my research is focus on some of these groups where there is not much data, whether that's women who are pregnant and being held by ICE. That was a project I worked on with Women's Refugee Commission, or this research study with American Families United focused on mixed status couples. So that's U.S. citizens, as you said, married to immigrants living in the country, but maybe don't have a pathway to legal status because of the nature of our legal system. So we were able to survey their members and other people within their network. American Families United advocates for and represents these couples. And one of the things we found from surveying 240 U.S. citizens in these marriages in the United States was a couple things. One thing we learned is that on average, these marriages have been together, people have been together for over 13 years. I know there's a misperception sometimes that when we talk about pathways to legal status, that this is something where people are looking for a shortcut or a handout. In reality, what the data shows is that these couples have been together for a long time, well over 13 years. In fact, 20% of everyone that we surveyed had been together for 20 years or more, which is quite a significant length of time. The second thing we learned is that there's been a real marked difference since January of this year in terms of what these couples are thinking about doing to try to keep their family together. Before the start of this year, before the start of this administration, less than half of married couples had a conversation about one or both of them leaving the country. But since January, more than 4 in 5, more than 80% of these married couples have sat down across the table and said, look, is living in the United States the right place for us, given what's happening? Now, the third data point I'd like to share is really about what the economic effects would be, because this isn't just potentially tearing families apart. We know that more than 3/4 of these mixed status couples have children, have U.S. citizen children, and there's other family members that they are also caring for as well. But if they leave, and when they leave crucial industries that we need workers in. So many of the spouses work in construction, landscaping, the service industry, other crucial areas that we need more workers rather than less, agricultural. Many of the spouses recorded that they work in agricultural industry, and the U.S. citizen spouses themselves, over half of them said if their partner were to leave the United States, they would go with them and they would take their labor with them. The largest group of them work in either medical fields or in teaching and education. So it'd be a big hit for the economy if we don't find a way for these families to stay together in the country.
So, Austin, you're saying the data is showing that they have talked about this. And do you have data showing that they are self-deporting? And do you have data showing that they're self-deporting as family units?
Yes, we do. One of the things that we asked about in the survey is that I didn't even think to ask at the very beginning. We learned in the process of piloting the study, Sandra, is that there's already dozens of people out of the 240 people we surveyed who are living separated or living outside of the country. So absolutely. And we've seen members of American Families United have left the country, have shared that they've left the country already this year, or for many of them, their spouses left the country and they're sort of stuck in the United States because they can't leave. So we are seeing the data does show that there are real effects. And 8% of the people we surveyed, which might not seem like a lot, but a little less than 10% said that they are actively planning on leaving either one or both of those spouses.
Wow. Many migrant advocates say this is basically another form of family separation for those who do have one spouse leave and one spouse stay here. You recently discussed with a woman, Amanda Ribeiro, and her husband was deported or self-deported to Brazil. Explain what happened.
Yes, that's right. So he was sent back to Brazil, And they have several children together, biological children together, and have sort of been offered, but sort of in a situation where they needed to adopt other U.S. citizen children from Amanda's family, and she did not want to be apart from him, and so she. After he was sent back to Brazil, she actually went down there with her kids to try to live there and make a life for themselves in rural Brazil. But unfortunately, she has some very severe medical issues. She had a heart attack, and given these and other issues, she had to move back to the country away from her husband, which has been enormously painful. And if you listen to, her story as she tells it, and what I published on Substack this morning, you'll see the heartbreak and the challenges and the hardships of this one, mother, wife, U.S. citizen who is just trying to keep her family together, and is not, is sort of collateral damage, basically, to our broken immigration system. And, one of the things that I find so compelling in Amanda's story, Sandra, is just she is a woman of deep religious conviction. She is not a political activist. She is not someone who is interested in political parties, or, it's not about that for her. It's really just about, can we find common sense solutions to keep families together? And her story is really powerful. I encourage everyone to go and listen to her.
Current detention data, there are 65,735 people in custody. Now, that was as of November 30th. That was a record high. Do we have more updated information? And like I mentioned, this is an all-time high. I mean, are there beds for these people? And are these people basically slated for deportation if they're being held in detention?
Yes, that's right. Detention is part of the mass deportation system, so you can't have mass deportation without mass detention. These are record high numbers. We've never seen anything close to this, really, in terms of the total detained population, and it seems to continue to grow. We should get new data out this week, probably the last data that we'll get before the end of the calendar year, before January. And we're coming up on that, the 1 year retrospective on the Trump administration, since Trump entered office. And so, yeah, we've seen a massive explosion in detention. It doesn't seem to be slowing down, and ICE has more money than ever to continue to grow it. So we expect that to continue.
We're speaking with Austin Kocher about a couple different topics here today, and we're going to continue that conversation after a quick break. So stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 2 minutes. Welcome back to Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Miranda. Sandra Sanchez, our South Texas correspondent, today leading a conversation with Austin Kocher.
Austin, last month, Human Rights First released its ICE flight report tracking deportation flights, documenting over 10,600 flights so far during President Trump's second term. What are the takeaways from some of this data that you have been following, and what's the important thing that we should know about it?
Sure. So the most important thing for the American public to understand about deportation flights is that the government is trying to hide this information as being increasingly secretive about how the deportation system is even working. They don't want people to understand. So organizations like Human Rights First has done a great job tracking these flights and documenting them so we understand better how the system works. And from that data, we learned two really important things. One is that although the total number of deportation flights out of the country it's increased, not quite as substantially as the administration is portraying, but the real issue has been there's been more flights to third countries, flights to deporting people back to places that they're not even from. So that represents a major issue involving potentially human rights and due process. The second thing that we learned from their research is that there's been a real spike in flights between detention centers. So we talked about detention before the break, and the record number of people detained at any given time is now over 65,000. But that's not 65,000 people who just stay in one place the whole time. ICE shuffles people around from detention center to detention center during the course of someone staying there. And so what we've seen is that shuffling is not only happening on buses, but as Human Rights First shows, it's happening through flights. So there are flights that ICE is sending people on across the country. And why does that matter? Well, it really matters because it makes it really difficult for family members to find their loved ones in detention and contact them. It also makes it really hard for attorneys and lawyers to get in touch with their clients and to make sure that they are being treated appropriately, to check in on civil rights violations, to document those, and also to make sure that their client just gets due process. Many of these people are asylum seekers, and without an attorney, they were almost certainly going to lose their case.
Do we know why ICE shuffles them from various cities? And, have they explained, is it for medical reasons? Is it because of a lack of bed space? Is it a lack of food? I mean, have you all used data are you able to even ask the migrants themselves? I mean, why this movement?
It's a great question, and there's years of research on this from geographers, immigration geographers like myself, who are interested in understanding the geography of immigrant detention. And there's a variety of reasons that ICE shuffles people between detention centers. Yes, they will say that partly it has to do with bed space. It also has to do with where people are in the process. So as people get closer to deportation, they're moved to those detention centers that are close to airports where people tend to be flown out of, in Louisiana, for instance. There's also other more punitive reasons that ICE moves people. So, for instance, in some of the high-profile arrests of green card holders along the East Coast in D.C. and in New York, those individuals, instead of staying in detention centers nearby, that did, as data that I looked at, showed that ICE did actually had more bed space for them closer to New York City. They intentionally moved them to Louisiana much further away so that they could prevent or limit, let's say, activism, reporters from asking questions, politicians from going and trying to get access to those facilities. And ICE also uses detention shuffles in a punitive way that if there are, let's say, hunger strikes, if there are people who are protesting the conditions of their detention, they can break up those coordinated efforts by detainees themselves by sending everyone to different facilities. So there's both sort of normal logistical reasons and also much more punitive political reasons.
Now, the cost of moving people around has to be pretty expensive. I saw some of the stats, $7,000 to $26,000 per flight. Is that the deportation flight? Is that the shuffling flight? Do we have a breakdown there?
That's an average across all flights. They do tend to all be pretty expensive. I have not seen more granular flight-by-flight cost on that, but I would say, broadly speaking, yes, these are very expensive flights. And the more expensive flights are obviously going to be the international ones. ICE is now flying much more often to Africa and places further away due to agreements that allow for third country removals or help facilitate third country removals. And that is ultimately, that's not just bad in terms of the human rights consequences for migrants themselves, but the taxpayer bears the cost of that as well.
And one of the ways that ICE is able to identify some of the people are through 287G agreements with law enforcement agencies. There was some reporting that you highlighted on your Substack recently by Andrew Thrasher, saying there's 1,246 287G agreements. That's like a record now nationwide. Florida has 339 and 250 in Texas. What does this mean? I mean, they have more eyes and boots, eyes on the ground. I mean, break this down for people who aren't that familiar with it.
Sure. So the federal government has had a longstanding assumption that they really don't have the resources to actually find, arrest, and deport every single person in the country because federal agencies in the past, now this has changed because ICE now has record influx of cash, so this is no longer necessarily true. But in the past, they have wanted to partner with local and state law enforcement agencies so that those other local officers are essentially doing the immigration work of the federal government. This has been controversial because there's lots of sheriff's offices and police departments that don't want to do the federal government's job for them for free. They don't necessarily get compensated for this. But the 287G program is the mechanism that allows for that. It allows ICE to say, hey, you're a local cop, you're a local sheriff. here's a badge. You get to go be an immigration officer now. And I've studied this program for the last 16, 17 years since it really exploded during the early Obama administration. And we've just never seen numbers like this. It's not just the number of law enforcement agencies who are now doing the work of the federal government, which it means if you or I or we're driving to the grocery store or driving to work, and we get pulled over by a local cop, there could be immigration consequences to that. So it's not just ICE that's doing immigration enforcement anymore. It's everybody with a badge, and that creates real tension when it comes to police-community relations. It's not only that, but they have been empowered with all kinds of new technology to do fingerprint scanning, on the side of the road. And all of this not only means fear for immigrant communities in places far from the border, in Florida, in Ohio, in North Carolina, but it also really blurs the line about who is actually, the local police officer that you can trust to call when you have an emergency, as opposed to an ICE agent who could end up getting you deported, even if you're the one calling as a victim of a crime.
I do have a question to because we have talked about 287Gs before. 250 agencies in Texas. There are 254 counties in Texas. But, there could be some some police departments, city police departments that are part of this. The question is, are there any school district police departments to date that you know of, or am I putting you on the spot in Texas?
I don't know specifically in Texas if there are any 287G compliant school districts. However, there are safety officers in lots of schools. This is something you and I have seen in our lifetime: the explosion of police officers in schools, especially in high schools. And if in that county, if there is a 287G agreement or some other kind of agreement about how law enforcement, works in that school district, I have seen many cases, Sandra, of high school students who starts off with an altercation or an argument in a lunchroom, and that person could end up in the deportation process, even as a minor.
Wow. That is, there's a link to it on your Substack for Andrew Thrasher's reporting, so I just do want to put a plug out there. You mentioned other places like Ohio. Your hometown is Ohio. Cleveland, I think you grew up there. And I saw where you had written about some of the rhetoric that President Trump has said specifically recently about Somalis being, quote, garbage. He wants them, quote, out of our country. How does this affect the perception of migrants? And you said growing up in Cleveland, you actually had a big Somali community there that I think you were particularly fond of. And so just talk about personally, how is this affecting you?
Certainly. Yeah. I grew up outside of Columbus, Ohio, actually.
Columbus.
And when I moved back, yeah, that's okay. I moved back and I moved into Columbus, and Columbus has the second largest Somali community in the country there. And so as a student who was studying immigration and doing research, in fact, many of my first relationships with the immigrant community there was not the Latino community, it was the Somali community. And one of the things that the Somali community is known for, many positive things that community brought to Columbus, Ohio, is they revitalized a significant part of the city around what we call Cleveland Avenue, which is just a couple blocks from where I spent most of my 20s and early 30s, and brought a vibrant culture and business and so much to that area. And so it's very difficult for me to hear the president say what he said, especially after just hearing what he said on the campaign trail about refugees in in Ohio, Haitian
the dogs
refugees.
and right.
They're eating the dogs and the cats comment. So it's been very difficult to hear him say that about migrants and refugees that I have developed deep respect for.
We've been speaking with Austin Kocher about a myriad of different topics that all include immigration data. That's unfortunately all the time we have today. As always, Austin, it is so great to have you with us today, and we hope we can call you again in the future for future programming. Despite you being from outside of Columbus, as someone from just outside of Ann Arbor, Michigan, I'll let it go this time. Thank you so much.
We can work across differences. Thank you so much.
All right, Border Report Live. We'll be back in 2 minutes. And welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. Always a very informative discussion when we have Austin Kocher on. And if you missed today's discussion with Austin Kocher, don't forget you can stay informed on the story shaping the U.S.-Mexico border while on your commute. Maybe you're working out at the gym or taking the dog out for a walk, as Border Report Live is now available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and the iHeartRadio app. That's going to do it for us today. For Sandra Sanchez here in South Texas, my name is Rudy Mideles. We'll see you all next time.